Hey guys, this is Daryl Jace. This is the second podcast without Pedro. Have a guest on. His name's Colin Maneval. Maneval?
Animal.
Yeah. So I guess he's a semi-poker pro, or part-time, rather. I'm not sure the best way to say that is. He plays, I guess, low to mid-stakes cash, mostly. Um, but mostly having him on because I think he's a pretty interesting guy, pretty well-rounded guy. I think he has some pretty interesting thoughts on meditation, life, politics, kind of everything. So I don't really choose people based. I mean, I would get someone on the podcast even if they never played poker. Pretty cool guy. I think you guys will enjoy this. And so yeah, I guess Colin, tell us a bit about your poker career.
All right. I guess I got started playing just because I hated college. It's probably similar to a lot of people. Um, I've I don't know. I played some online, but I was always more drawn to playing live. I was always a more successful live player. And I don't know. Some people can't stand sitting next to dumb old people, and some people can't stand pushing buttons. I get tired, I burn out from pushing too many buttons. So I played full time for about 5 years, mostly live cash, a little bit of live tournaments, a little bit online. Uh, when I was lower in funds, I would typically play no limit, 2-5 and 5-10. When I had more funds, I'd typically play limit hold'em and mixed games like 40-80 and up to 100, 200 is the highest I played. It's not nosebleeds by any means, but taking shots in those games.
Were your win rates higher in the mixed games, or did you just enjoy it more?
I think they tended to be pretty close, even though the swings would be slightly higher. So like my 40-80 win rate was probably about my 5-10 no limit win rate. But I found it way less boring. Yeah, the mentality, the kind of the scene of the fixed limit games are just like a lot more conversational, a lot faster paced. No one's sitting there tanking ever. You don't have some kid wearing headphones and sunglasses who thinks he's like the next guy on WPT. It's like people there. It's just like a social atmosphere between like the regs, the pros, and the casual players. Like everyone's just there to like shoot shit and have fun, and so it just ends up being way less draining emotionally than sitting there next to some kid who's trying to stare you down. And you're like, I know what you're gonna do. Just do it already, you know.
Do you think that's a leak of a lot of the online players who play live, just being really untalkative and kind of antisocial?
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of my good friends from the poker world are kind of like older, smart grinders who kind of grew up in the poker world where you had to, like, you wanted to make the fish as comfortable as possible. Like, you wanted to make friends with them. Like, you wanted to do whatever you could to make the game kind of like amicable and enjoyable. But there are there were guys like there was a guy at Foxwoods who play whatever the biggest fixed limit game was. I've only played with him as so there was a guy who used to play at Foxwoods. And he would play whatever the biggest fixed limit game was in the room. Sometimes it was 75, 150. Sometimes it was 153 or 240. And it was typically like OE or HOE or something like that. And literally just call every street and then ask the dealer what he had at the end. I mean, like, that's not an exaggeration. You would see every showdown and just, like, flip his hand over and be like, all right, do I have a low? And, oh, only got 3 cards below an 8, or whatever it might be. And he'd be like, oh, I guess I lose then. And he would obviously, like, be slow because the dealer would have to say, oh, it's on you every time. And he just wasn't used to, like, sitting at a poker table. But he was the nicest guy ever. And he just didn't care about dumping money. And eventually, at some point, like, some like younger players were just like frustrated with him and were like, learn how to play poker, why don't you? And he was like, his attitude was basically, the blackjack dealer doesn't berate me, so I'm gonna go do that. Now he plays 10K a hand blackjack upstairs. Like, you know, I'm all for getting in more hands an hour, but you got a guy who literally doesn't know what he's doing, especially playing games like Omaha 8, Stud 8. Like, he's never going to have a winning session.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I've always been kind of the mentality, you know, I'll put on headphones anyway if it's, you know, either a table that's already crazy or a table that's already stuck in like we're all going to grind it out kind of mentality. But if it's like a table where I've got some people who I get the, you know, someone that'll have some banter with me, get the fish unfocused and laughing and drinking or whatever, like, I'm always going to do that.
Yeah, makes sense. What other mistakes you think people, like online guys, make at the tables?
I mean, this is, I don't know, my thought on this comes from a no-limit perspective, I guess, although it can be in other places too. A lot of the time, there are these spots that happen all the time in live cash. Probably happen in live tournaments too, I just haven't played any in years. But you'll have these players that, you know, you can have a very sound hand-reading base where you're like, oh, this person's polarized, like they either have, you know, one of these 3 hands or they've got air or whatever. Sometimes you can be like, they've got the stone cold nuts or they've got air, but this is a great time to represent it, or at least they think it's a good time to represent. It's actually, it'll come up in PLO too, and like, you're like, this is such a good spot to do with like the blocker or ace of clubs or whatever. But what online players or, you know, good hand reading players don't realize sometimes is that the guy who's sitting across from you is never ever bluffing.
Yeah.
If you're just looking at some guy who, like, their idea of bluffing isn't like, let's write a good story essentially and make it be like take this line of like float, like, I don't know, double float raise river.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, that line looks super strong, and to like a knowledgeable player, they might be like, oh, this is a really good spot for them to rep the nuts because they've been playing it so strong, so they've probably got air like 45% of the time.
I think this kind of goes back to chatting up people, because I think when you chat up these fish and kind of understand how they think about the game, or even just listen to how they talk about the game, you learn they don't think in any way that like online players do, or the way you do, you know?
Right. And so I think that's a leap. People just like haul off in spots. Even on earlier streets, not even on the river. Like, there are small bets when you're like, oh, this person's never like double barreling his air, or even like his semi draws, like or semi bluffs. Like, live players sometimes act very uniformly, and like, there are just spots where, like, a live donk lead from from certain players just means the same thing every time. It means, like, I've got top pair and I want to know where I'm at.
Yeah.
And the interesting decision doesn't become, like, what do they have? It ends up, or, like, the interesting part, it ends up being, like, well, they haven't thought about how to play this hand further, and the question is, if I raise them here with my air, are they like, oh, now they've told me where they're at, and I'm going to fold my hand? Or do they just go, boop, I've got top pair, top kicker, it's going to go in.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to put in my 100 big blinds, even though my initial plan was to see where I'm at.
Yeah, I think they kind of just divide in those two lines, kind of.
Yeah, and both of those players exist, and they're not the same person.
Yeah.
They're typically two separate people, and to not realize that before you either just fold your hand, which you would normally be c-betting, or raising it when you get donk-led into, like, depends on who, like, which of those two guys you're playing against.
Yeah. I guess that comes down to, like, being able to stereotype people or, like, catalog people,
Yeah.
like, to one side or the other, or just listening to the shit they say, basically.
Yeah, so I think often, like, the online players who start playing cash more or whatever, they don't think about that. They're just like, oh, well, I have good hand reading skills, and so, like, this guy probably has just one pair, and if I raise him here, he can't commit, like, a 150 big blind stack. Problem is, he doesn't realize that this guy is that guy who commits 150 big blind stack, because he just goes, oh, top pair, it's going in.
There's another interesting point about talking to other people at the table. There's this, I remember playing a lot live and just feeling like none of these people are, like, I'm not interested in talking to any of these people. And there's this really good Emerson quote, Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'm going to butcher it, but basically he just says, like, in some way, like, in every single person I meet, there's something they do better than me or something I can learn from them, you know?
Sure. And that's a funny thing about poker players, especially when you get to bigger money games. This might not be true of 1-2 tables or even 2-5 tables some of the time, but typically anyone who's playing bigger than that has money. Now, sure, you've got your guys who are like, oh, I got a paycheck and I saved up or got lucky, whatever, had 2K in my pocket and I'm going to buy into a 5-10 game, and if I lose, I'm back to square one. But for the most part, there are people who are either, fairly good poker players, good enough to be 2-5 or moving up, or they're successful at something. They're good lawyers, they're good accountants, they're good, they're professional athletes, they're, one of a million things.
Yeah, I was playing the WSOP main event, and there was this guy to my left. He was an amateur, and he was making some pretty bad plays. Like, he'd fold jacks in a spot where he should snap call. He, like, just check called with this huge hand on the river. Like, everyone at the table was, like, making fun of him and berating him. And I'm sitting on the left, I'm talking to him, and he's, like, this super interesting guy. He works for, like, the Barrett-Jackson auction. Like, testing out the cars, pricing them, all that shit, even gets to, like, test drive all these, like, crazy cars, $1 million cars. And just really interesting, nice dude. And poker players just have this idea, like, if you don't know how to play poker, that just makes you a stupid person or something.
There's a guy who's a regular in the 2040 and 4080 limit hold'em games at Foxwoods, who's, I don't know, he's got to be in his mid to late 80s, and he comes down, plays a couple days a week, nicest guy, and he donates, he splashes around, and his line, whenever some kid would be like, he'd suck out on them, and the kid would be like, oh, like, you don't even know what you're doing. He would just laugh at them and just be like, I have more money than you will ever have. Keep grinding your pokers. Like, he's like, I don't care. Like, I made my money elsewhere. I'm here to have fun, you know?
Yeah, I think it's just like there's a lot of poker players who don't know anything besides how to play poker. So they
Yeah.
just put this really heavy emphasis on poker and like that like if you're not good at poker, that's like a big, I don't know what the right word is. Kind of butchering this, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's the thing is, I'm totally interested in having conversations at the table. Pretty much none of those conversations involve poker.
Yeah.
Like, I avoid. I mean, I definitely don't want to talk strategy or hands at the table, unless like someone wants to tell me something.
You were one of the first people I talked to at the table, and you asked me how I was doing, and I talked about poker, and you're like, "Oh, I don't want to hear about poker. Like, what's going on?"
It's
Like,
like, I know you play poker. Like,
yeah,
and I know you probably like know how to read a hand. You know, like I don't care. Like I want to I have to sit here for 10 hours. Like, what's up? You know, like what's going on with you? Are you a crazy person? Crazy people are interesting too, man. You know, like crazy people, smart people, successful people, disasters of human beings. You come across them all at casinos, at poker tables, and they're all interesting in their own way.
yeah. I started off younger, really not wanting to deal with many people, just not finding them interesting. But as I get older and older, the more I kind of just want to meet new people and strike up conversations with people. Um, I remember I was reading this book yesterday. It's the Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and he's talking about Theodore Roosevelt, and he knew every single person at the White House by name, like all the maids, all the people who worked for him, janitors, cooks, whatever, and had regular conversations with them all the time. And I don't know, it was just really interesting, just seeing someone that successful, just having time for anyone, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You kind of have to. I think like you can't get too swept up in your own importance. You know, like there's so many people and so much stuff out there that like I don't know. I just feel like I want to, whether it's the casino or like I also work at a rock climbing gym. Like I want to just like know everybody and like see who they all are and I don't know. Meet a lot of people. Most of them aren't going to be that awesome, but like if you meet enough, like you're going to find some pretty awesome people. It's kind of always been my perspective on it.
Yeah, so that's the thing I find pretty interesting about you. I mean, you're a pretty like interesting guy. I think you're like into a lot of things, but like you also coach ultimate frisbee. I think you had like a music thing going on for a while. Then the poker thing, lots of other shit. But I think it's what's very interesting and probably pretty helpful to people is like I think you're really good at setting up a good group of friends and having a pretty good social life. And what do you think are like? Because I'm someone who's pretty bad at that, and I think there's a lot of people. And what do you think are the common mistakes that people who are bad at it do?
Well, so this is actually something I was talking about with someone at the table a few days ago.
Okay.
Full circle. Um, so, especially for poker players end up having like kind of the outcome of whether their life is good or bad, or like whether they're happy or depressed, so much based on like how their poker lives are going, how they're running, kind of their relationships within the poker communities. Um, and I think that's really destructive both to your mental health and to eventually to your like gameplay as well. Your susceptibility to tilt and all that kind of stuff. I've always had a really like, sure, I've got friends in the poker community. Typically, like a couple that I'm close with, and then a bunch that I'm always friendly with. Um, but I always make sure that I'm like touching back with good friends that have nothing to do with poker. You know, we don't talk poker. We go out. We'll have dinner, drinks, go out to events, like do stuff so that your life has significant value away from the table. I think that's really important to really being successful in anything. You can like sit down and plug away 80-hour weeks playing poker, but like one, you're gonna burn out. Two, eventually when things go downhill, you're gonna be fucking miserable. And I think it's really important to like find a community outside of that. So to kind of answer your question more directly, for people who have that problem where they, I don't know, they don't have an easy time finding new friends or out in kind of friends they want or friends at all, whatever. I think it's important to find different communities and kind of jump into them and see where that takes you. Whether that's some kind of athletic endeavor. I'm into athletic stuff. I play ultimate. I rock climb. I did Krav Maga for a long time. And I did CrossFit for a while. Like all those things, like have their own communities around them, and so going to a rock climbing gym and like starting conversations with people, I think is a really good way just to like meet people who have a different background from you, and you're creating relationships that aren't dependent on like your financial status, and like your success at your job, essentially. So I think just like finding different communities, throwing yourselves in them, and just like open yourself up, being honest with people, talking to them.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, just being open and honest. I think you can get away with like a lot of faults if you're just open and honest about them. Secondly, I think a problem I had was worrying about being interesting, right? But if you're just genuinely interested in that other person that you're talking to and really really show interest and that you like them, they're generally going to like you. Is I think how it goes. I'm not sure if you'd agree or not with that though.
Yeah, I think honest people are almost always interesting in some way or another. What ends up not being interesting is someone who just wants to be cordial, who just wants to kind of get by, just wants to like be fun and nice. Those people end up being the ones that come off as like, well, this person really has nothing to say.
Yeah.
Whereas someone who, like, I always try to be nice. Like, I never like try to be offensive, but I'm also not afraid of saying something that's going to go against what someone else believes. I think that's important. I think it's important to kind of just be yourself. If someone doesn't like you, like, fine, whatever. There's a lot of people out there. You don't have to be friends with everyone you talk to. But if you don't kind of be yourself and be honest and do you, then, like, again, no one's going to think you're that interesting because you're not being you, and you are the part that's interesting.
Sorry, I just had like on Skype they have these like I guess bots that just try and I don't know like these porn bots or something. This one person just has to be the worst of all time. Like I'm not sure what it is because it's like the name's like Winky Birdie or something. So he types hey, and then 2 hours later I type hi, and then 3 hours later he's like hey, then I type hi, then he just types hi again. I'm like, LOL, and he still just types hi. It's like he never moves on from that opening. Just,
Man, I am jealous of you.
I know I get. You should see all the bots I get on Twitter and shit.
I don't mess with that Twitter stuff.
Oh really? Just with Facebook?
This is the weirdest thing. My mother a couple days ago was like, maybe you should get Twitter. I was like, what? It was really bizarre. But yeah, I've got Facebook. I kind of hate it, but then again, use it all the time.
Fair enough.
I like its functions for me.
Why is it so hard for people to kind of just be honest and open? I feel like it's so rare to run into someone that's just honest and open.
I think people are afraid of rejection and kind of what will happen if the things that they are embarrassed about are seen. And I think people kind of hold more importance to things than really exist. I actually think it's an interesting, kind of from the poker perspective, I think it's really interesting to see how often people act and kind of go through life without like a logical methodology to those actions. And a lot of people just like are afraid or act in ways just because they're used to it or because they've been told they're supposed to do that. Because there's so many social constructs around that. That we're not supposed to be publicly sexual or we're not supposed to be feminine if you're a guy or masculine if you're a girl, or a million different things that people are like, well, if I kind of am myself, and that's going to come off as I'm a guy who really likes dance, ballet, or something. I don't know. I'm just giving
Taylor Swift songs.
Yeah, whatever it is. People are afraid that they're going to be looked upon in a negative way. And what they don't realize is like, who gives a shit? Like, not only who cares, but there's what, we're now at 7.3 billion people in the world or something.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there who have the same weird interests as you and the same kind of weird mentalities and outlooks and whatever it else might be. Like, if you think you got some weird things going on, you shouldn't meet less people. You should meet more people, and eventually you're going to find those people that see the world the same as you. But too often, we kind of, because we're afraid or we're used to, we have some kind of tradition ingrained in us, we fear the world instead of kind of try to access more of it.
Yeah, I guess a lot of these things are subjective, and I think what's interesting is, especially someone like me, I struggle with this quite a bit. Well, I used to struggle with it a ton, but now I don't, and perhaps I'll get into that story, is valuing other people's opinions over your own, or not even thinking about your own opinion on something. So I had a lot of things out that I was embarrassed to say out loud or tell people about. And I never thought about, well, should I be embarrassed of this? Is this something to be embarrassed about? Is what I'm doing really wrong? If there is there even like a wrong or right here? And I think the practice of thinking, judging what you're doing on your own, judging your own opinion of yourself rather than people you don't know's opinion or people you barely just met over your own, I think is a good practice to do. But to go back to like my story, like I was extremely scared of public, just being open, to the point where I definitely couldn't like do stuff like dance in public or singing like karaoke, just totally out of the question. I was definitely one of those guys who tried to find a way to just agree with everyone, even if it was like I'll just find like the part I would agree with them on and not discuss the part I disagree with them on, and like often take I would often take like both sides of like an argument too.
Sure, sure.
And I guess it wasn't. I mean, one, I had a wife who just pushed me to do these things, so she would push me to go to clubs and stuff like that, and then eventually I would be able to dance with the adequate amount of weed and alcohol. Then I just needed like less and less weed and less alcohol. Now I'm at the point where it's like, I can do it without any of those things and have just as good as time as someone who drinks. And I think it's just the going out and doing it part. I try to I try to think my way out of this, right? And which helps. I mean, it helps to kind of think about how stupid it is, but unless you actually go out and do it, it's hard to get over that fear, right? Um, I remember not being able to approach people for coaching. Like, I really wanted to approach top players for coaching, but I was just like way too scared. And I just, you could think about all the rational things of like, oh, what can happen if I do this? And, well, he could say no, and he's probably not going to be a dick about it, and he just says no. Or he says yes, which would be amazing. And it's, for some reason, it's still hard to do if, like, you've never done it before. I remember I wrote out this message to a guy on Facebook. It's like, pretty good player. Cal, actually. And like I wrote out the whole thing, spent way too fucking long trying to like perfect it, make it sound good, and as after it was finished writing out, like I couldn't even push the button. And I'm like, Ashley, come here and push the button. I can't even do it. She had to like come over, push the button, and now I'm at the point where it's just I can kind of just do that all the time. Um, it's just not a problem. And I guess that was just the first step, even though, it's pretty embarrassing and pathetic kind of story. But, like, after that, you do it more and more times, it just gets easier and easier. Hold on one second.
Sure.
Oh. Yeah, go ahead.
It's funny. I'm actually. I don't know if I'd say I'm like afraid or get anxiety from it, but I've never felt comfortable asking anyone for money, even like a stake. Like I've never been staked. Maybe with the aside, like this, the difference of someone taking a piece of my action in a tournament. Maybe a small hand, like no more than 5 times ever.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how to market myself as a player. Partially because I'm not an online player, so I don't have I can't be like, check out my shark scope. I clearly crush these state tournaments online for this many, this ROI or whatever else. But yeah, I don't know how to market myself for backing, so I just never have. Which I don't know. I'm kind of happy with. Like I like the idea that I didn't have a job for 5 years or whatever other than poker, and it was never on anyone else's dime either.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of being backed. I always had this negative view of marketing as well. I just always kind of associated it with just being really douchey and kind of like, I don't know. I feel like I always felt like putting yourself out there and kind of like trying to sell yourself was kind of a bad idea.
Well, I mean, the online world is so used to it, is so used to backing, I think. But like a lot of the older live grinders that I've been friends with over the years, and especially the most successful ones, have always, like, their attitude that they've kind of given to me is always like, well, if someone's asking you for money, why are they asking you for money? Like, there's only a couple answers. Like, either they're not actually a good poker player. In that case, like, you shouldn't give them money to play poker. 2, like, they're not reliable with money, and they've lost somebody else's money and are now going to somebody new before paying back the first person. Like, another person you shouldn't lend money to. Like, they're irresponsible with their financial habits. This person, like, maybe you want to lend money to, but, like, probably you don't, because they might just take your money and spend it instead, or they're desperate for some reason. Like, you just don't want to lend money to desperate people. So it always feels weird with that attitude. I always feel weird asking somebody else, like, "Oh, can I get a stake for this bigger game?" Because it's like, well, why don't I have? Like, I pull that on myself. And I'm like, well, I should have this money if I want to be playing in this game.
I,
Um,
I think there's a small subset of people that are good buys. That's why if you go to 2+2, I think a lot of the buys are pretty bad because there's a marketplace for it.
yeah,
Um, but there is this subset of people that are just playing a lot higher. Like they're a good winning player, but they want to play the 50K horse at the World Series, or they want to play the 10K six max. And playing a 10K six max on a 500K roll isn't really a good idea because your ROI is really small and it's a really tough field. Yeah.
yeah, but sure, with a tournament like that, the 10K six max or the 50K um, horse, like for that type of investment, I mean, it comes down to how much money you've got, I guess. But for that type of investment, your return is going to be so low. I mean, it's practically impossible to know who actually has an edge in the 50K horse field.
Imagine Phil Ivey has an edge.
Yeah, I mean, I assume he does, but and there's a handful of other players that I would say the same thing for. But I would say that for probably, I would think that in my head about like 75% of that field, which like begs the question, like they probably can't all have significant edges considering rake, like.
Yeah.
And so somebody who's like known as a really good, nosebleed mixed game player is losing in those games. Um,
yeah, a lot of them are, I bet.
yeah, and so our images of those players, it's funny. Players who've been playing with those players for a long time will often say like, "Yeah, it's like they're not that good." Like, it's just funny. It's like weird to think where that money is coming from.
I was actually, so I was in this, I've been selling shares kind of privately for the past 2 years with really good results, but I was just financially irresponsible, but had a really good track record for not ever stealing money from people.
Right.
So I think there's those people who are just financially bad with money, good with poker, but have like a good rep of not stealing money from people. I think those are the only people you should stake,
Right.
basically.
I totally agree. Those are the only people. There was a player who came to me asking for a stake who, like, at one point or another, was known as like one of the bigger winning players in the 5-10 game at the Woods, at the Foxwoods when I say the Woods, and he's like a Vegas rag now. He's going to listen to this and be like, "Hey, I'm not going to say," but but he came to me for like a 2-5 stake. In my head, I'm like I know he can beat 2-5. Like what's going on here? And so I talked to a bunch of other 5-10 regs and people who I would assume he would go to asking for stakes. And multiple people said something like along the lines of like, yeah, you'd think he would win, but then he would report losses. So like I don't know if he was taking money and reporting it as a loss, or if he was actually losing in games he shouldn't be losing in. But like either way, it didn't seem worth it. And so, if you're gonna, I don't know, if you're gonna be a poker player for a living, like you just need to be honest all the time. Like you can't do anything shady.
Yeah, I was at the Woods for the World Series. The general, right?
Not by that name.
He's the guy. He complains a lot. Old guy. I think he's like Afghani. Like worked for like the U.S. I don't want to use the word spy, but I'm gonna use the word spy. That
What game does he play?
He plays tournaments. I I played with him playing tournaments. He plays all the tournaments. I'm sure he plays cash as well.
I basically don't play tournaments at Foxwoods.
Yeah, I'm sure he plays cash too, but he like
Okay.
I've seen him a bunch of days and he's just complaining about people owing him money and not paying him back. And then during the main event, he was actually running after some dude who owed him money and then cashed big in a tournament and wasn't paying him.
That's so funny.
Uh, um, I think a lot of people just buy a piece and they don't think about this stuff and kind of just lose money. It's just generally a pretty bad investment, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only people that I typically the only people I buy pieces of are people that are actually friends of mine who I want to like be on the rail for and like sweat it if they do well.
Yeah.
And like I don't necessarily think it's I mean like inevitably I do think it's a good investment, but I don't think it's like, oh, I'm going to crush this investment. Like it's not like some delusional idea of like, oh, I'm going to buy, $100 from someone's, $2,500 buy-in or whatever, and I'm going to smash, and he's going to win first place. Like, no, it's like, I'm going to buy it. It's going to make me root for him even more than he's my friend, and like, even if he loses, like, I'm not going to care. Like, he's a buddy of mine, like, I'm buying a piece. Like, it's cool. I don't know. I don't think of it as like a business play.
Yeah. So completely changing gears randomly.
Let's do it.
Educate me on some Bernie Sanders because
Oh,
you're getting
Bernie
me excited.
Sanders, yes. Bernie Sanders 2016.
Let's go.
What was your question?
Basically, I mean, I wasn't planning on voting this year, but you kind of excited me about him, I guess. What do you think is so interesting about him? Like, why should I vote for him? Why is he not going to be another Obama, who I wasn't a big fan of?
So I'm a fairly politically pessimistic person. The whole thing has kind of depressed me for the last, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, whatever. And the reason why I'm actually pretty optimistic about Bernie Sanders and the potential for the American political future is, to not be too grandiose, he is really maybe the only totally honest and like stick to his guns candidate. God, like practically political office holder in the U.S. in like a while. Who I'll also admit I also agree with almost all of his policy points and his views.
Does he have any examples of just being really honest in spots where it was really bad for him, like politically?
Yeah. So his whole campaign is kind of aggressively against the like lobbying and like the billionaire class, essentially. Mm-hmm. He's running his campaign entirely without super PAC money, and
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really awesome. And a year ago, people were basically saying it wasn't possible, and they were saying you just can't overcome, the George Soros on the left and the Koch brothers and what's his name, the guy who owns the Venetian,
Sheldon
Adelson,
my hero.
Yeah. What a dork. But people said like you can't overcome that money when they're investing
billions.
Yeah, I mean, Sheldon Adelson invested like a couple $100 million in the last election. The Koch brothers were just under $1 billion, I think. Soros was around there too. I mean, huge money, and Bernie Sanders has basically said, none of that. I'm against all of it. It's corrupting politics. The lobbying money and the billionaire money is kind of changing policy, and it's no longer for the interest of the everyday person and the everyday worker and the everyday taxpayer, so on and so forth. But politicians are basically just doing the bidding for these super rich people. And for those of you guys who are like, I don't know, it's not in like a conspiracy theory kind of way. It's not like New World Order. It's not any of that Illuminati. It's like,
I'm a big believer in Illuminati.
I think it's a lot complicated than that.
Not really. Go ahead.
But what it is that, you know, the average congressman, congresswoman, whatever, goes to something like 1,000 fundraisers a year. Like, it literally turns out to multiple fundraisers a day for every day of the year. You know, you end up questioning, like, where's the time for reading legislation and, you know, discussing policy and all that, and writing good policy and all that, when all it is pandering to money.
Yeah.
And so Sanders has taken a big stand against it. For those of you who are more politically inclined, he's super strong on overturning Citizens United, which is the act, the law that says that corporations are people, and therefore unlimited donations from corporations is considered freedom of speech. And then initially people were discussing him like, oh, he's not even a real candidate, he has no shot. And in, what was it, in Iowa, or was it New Hampshire, the poll was saying that he was like 10 points behind Hillary Clinton and coming up fast. Some polls have been saying he's essentially even with Hillary Clinton for the Democratic ticket, which is
insane. That's
insane.
crazy.
That he's doing, you know, they've had to change venues to have more people, to accommodate more people at his like town hall meetings and his rallies. I mean, he's getting huge support, both financially from individuals donating to his campaign and from people showing up to his conventions and to, you know, voting for him in the polls. He's really kind of showing that people can make a difference on kind of like a person level.
Whether he wins or loses this year, this is going to change things for 2020, I think.
It really will. It's really exciting. I don't think we've had kind of like a grassroots national movement like this, at least in the political level.
What's his stance on stuff like liberty type stuff, like the war on drugs and NSA spying?
So he tends to be very liberal in the American policy sense, with some leanings towards the libertarian sense. So, which is funny, some of you guys who might know are like, no, he calls himself a democratic socialist. And yes, that's true. There's a lot to be said for not just labeling someone one thing and being like, oh, I know how he's, you know, what that all means. He has come out against NSA spying. He has come out against the war on drugs, and I think the way he typically frames it against the war on drugs is he's against the expansion of the prison system, and the fact that our country right now is investing way more money in prisons than they are in education, and that's a huge problem.
What does he suggest that you do with drugs?
So he's written a bunch of just kind of like basic economic plans, and what they are raise the minimum wage, invest in education, invest in public health care, and invest in putting tons of Americans to work rebuilding infrastructure. bridges, roads, public buildings, that kind of thing.
What about weapons? I want more weapons.
He is not for a lot more weapons.
Damn it.
He tends to be towards the libertarian side when it comes to foreign policy. He is for, or he is against having free trade agreements. So the TPP is the one that's big right now, which basically allows us to outsource jobs with little or kind of fewer consequences, which would basically be tariffs. Putting if jobs or if products come from overseas, then we're not raising the taxes on those products.
Okay, so a company like Apple, which kind of outsources everything overseas, they would be less inclined to do so with his policies. Would be like
Right.
tax more, right?
Right. Well, so Apple's a little more interesting, and it would somewhat affect Apple, but Apple also goes overseas. We see all the stuff in China for their, people were jumping off the buildings and stuff because the conditions were bad. But
Yeah.
a lot of Apple's products are actually made, or their parts.
Colin, you're like moving something around. It's like really loud.
I was just adjusting my screen. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem.
A lot of Apple's products are actually made in Germany and Korea, and in a bunch of places that have. I'm not sure about Korea. I think Korea is they're from like 6 different countries, and I think Germany is actually the number one. And they're just put together in those horrible factories in China.
Okay.
So the reason why they're getting made in Germany is because Germany's education system's better, and people know how to make computer parts better in Germany than we do. But yeah, so a company that, let's say clothing companies that can make their clothes really cheap in Indonesia or in Thailand or in China, will outsource their clothing manufacturing to there and then ship it back because they can pay their employees there essentially, pennies on the dollar what they would pay here.
A buddy of mine who he was a buyer and he would buy from companies like Nike and Reebok and stuff. So the way they would get around, because there'd be what are the words, requirements for the places they outsource to, like health requirements or
Right.
proper work conditions. So what kind of happens, I don't know if they profit off of this, but the people who they outsource to, those people outsource as well. And there's
Right.
no work requirements there at all.
Yeah, so that's how typically they get around, like, claiming responsibility or even knowledge of, working standards that in the U.S. we are not okay with. So what would happen? They outsource their jobs. Let's take a clothing company. They outsource their manufacturing, ship it back. That product is then sold at market value, so whatever it would be, regardless of there's no taxation to bring it back in, which would be a tariff. And so the profits just go straight to, the company's production. Whether it's shareholders or whether it's a board or CEO is privately owned, whoever it is, the top family. But it's not going to the American economy unless you believe in trickle-down economics, which and people are torn about. But basically, that money is going to the top. It's not going to the American people.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It doesn't seem like it's trickling down very, very much.
Right. So that's Bernie Sanders' approach on that.
Right.
Also,
Let me ask you about this drug thing a bit more, because
sure.
What does he want to do with drugs? I mean, I'm pretty ignorant, but I feel like all drugs should kind of be legalized, but with a lot of like caveats and safety checks in place, and I could go deeper into that, but what's his exact stance on that?
I am going to look it up real quick.
Oh, internet. Use it.
Internet. I know he says things about how like we're locking up too many people for minor drug infractions and stuff. Let me see if
So
let
yeah,
me see.
what I'm thinking about is legalizing it, but you'd have to buy it from, you know, a government center, basically. And I guess there'd be a whole bunch around. And you'd have limits on the amount you could have, basically.
All
And
right.
go.
So here's a little excerpt. When asked about it. By the way, he's a senator from Vermont right now. He used to also be the mayor of Burlington, Vermont. That's a little background. Here's a quote from him. He says, "Let me just say this. The state of Vermont voted to decriminalize the possession of small amounts of marijuana, and I support it, and I support that. I have supported the use of medical marijuana, and when I was mayor of Burlington in a city with a large population, I can tell you very few people were arrested for smoking marijuana. Our police had more important things to do."
Okay.
So that is, I think that's kind of his sense, which is that he's for not arresting people. He's for decriminalization. He's for medical marijuana. But I don't see him as a president that's going to like make moves aggressively to legalize and regulate recreational use of drugs, at least early in his career. I think he's got a lot of other things he wants to tackle first.
What do you think about legalizing all drugs?
I suppose, it's my perspective on that, the whole idea kind of at every level is somewhat weird. So I personally don't smoke weed. I smoked a lot of, or do any other drugs.
Loser. Go ahead.
I drink.
Yeah.
I smoked weed when I was younger. Eventually just kind of wasn't that into it. But never really experimented much with anything else. But it's kind of a selfish thing. I think that I don't think people should be arrested for weed at all. So I think it should be decriminalized. And in theory, I think that it and probably all or most other drugs should be legal, or at least people shouldn't be locked up for it by any means. That being said, I think that people doing drugs is bad for them, and I don't really want it around all the time. Like, not for me. I mean, like, I don't want my community, and like I think it's bad for our communities and bad for people to be doing lots of drugs. That being said, I don't think
So you wouldn't like it if right next to your house in Newton there was a drug dispensary that sold heroin?
Yeah, basically. That being said, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with people doing it. I kind of morally, or, and I definitely don't think people should be like locked up for it. I don't think there's any moral stance to be had on it. I don't think it's more just like I think it makes people less interesting, and I think it makes the world less interesting. Now, sure, there's something to be said for like doing mushrooms once a year, like gives you an interesting perspective, and I don't write that off as bullshit. I think there might be something to be said for that.
They're just starting to do studies on it with pretty good preliminary results on not just like, oh, it's interesting experience, like long lasting changes in personality for, and the better, and air quotes.
People that I don't know, believe what they say, or at least like their can tend to consider their opinions as good ones, have that perspective, and it's largely so much not part of my life that I don't really care, so long as like people aren't being locked up for it, which they are, so I care. But like as far as like the people that I care to surround myself with, typically it's people who do either a small amount or no drugs.
So the problem with just decriminalization is we're not addressing the big cartels who have a lot of power, a lot of money, a lot of influence because of the whole drug trade.
Well, there are a few problems, and that's one of them. That's a big one. Um, Another problem is it's by having it still illegal, but decriminalizing it. It still gives this idea that there's a reasonable moral stance on it. Um, it tells kids that we should. I'm for raising children to be thoughtful, intelligent people, and I think any program like Dare or whatever else that tells kids black and white, where you have like cops or whoever come into your classroom and be like, I always thought this was ridiculous when I was in like 5th grade, and I had the Dare class. A cop came
Everyone
in,
thought there was ridiculous. Like,
yeah, but you had a cop who said something to me like, there's no reason to do heroin. And as a 10-year-old, I thought to myself, well, that's ridiculous. Of course there's a reason to do it. It might not be a good enough reason, but don't bullshit us and tell us there's no reason to do heroin. It probably feels awesome.
yeah, I'm sure it feels
It might
great.
also ruin your life. Like, maybe that's a better perspective. Like, and I think by making it illegal, even if it's decriminalized, we're still telling people, like, this is gonna ruin your life. This is the worst. You should never like. And I think we need to have a more intelligent dialogue about it than that.
Yeah. I think it has just so many huge problems it being illegal. Like, how much money do we spend on the war on drugs, which is basically us completely losing, right?
Right.
Um, and a lot of cops dying, a lot of people dying. Like, how many kids die? How many kids die and gang members? Like, how many people join gangs because it's like the easy route out, you know?
And the war on drugs also, has perpetuated itself largely as the war on the poor and the war on.
Are you working?
Yeah, I'm on a
Black
podcast.
Okay.
Okay, I'll be up in a bit.
Sorry, the war on drugs has largely become the war on the poor and the war on black communities.
Alright, I gotta go.
They have, there's lots of research and articles about this, which we don't have time to get into, but both poor people and black people have seen the poor end of the stick in the judicial system because of drug laws over and over and over. And it's really destroyed communities and inner cities, and to kind of justify those actions by saying, well, drugs are bad for you and we're trying to get rid of drugs. It's like, well, no, getting rid of, fathers is ruining your communities.
But there's, like, the problem with legalizing is, well, now you have people doing heroin walking around in your community.
And so I think on that point, if you're going to like fully legalize all drugs, which whether or not it would ever happen is a different question, but if, for instance, you were going to, you would have to also implement large kind of community programs where, if people were addicted to heroin or, wanted to try heroin or whatever, you'd need to provide, I don't know, like safe drug houses, or I don't know. I don't know how they would do it, but there would have to be
Controlled type of environment.
Yeah, you would have to at least make an attempt towards that.
Yeah.
If heroin was legal for recreational use, you would, I suppose people, if it was like alcohol and you can't do heroin out on the streets, but you can do it in the privacy of your own home, there's the question of like, well, what if you've got kids and, whether you need a license to carry heroin like you would for a gun, and in that case you have to pass a background check or prove that you're not a danger to your children, or
Yeah.
it gets complicated. That's the problem with legalizing something which, although in an ideal world shouldn't be legal, becomes or has the potential to be destructive.
I mean, I guess another problem is the argument, are more people going to try it now? Like, like, I think you'll have a bunch of mothers being scared. What if my 18-year-old daughter decides she wants to try heroin one day?
Yeah, I think that's you hear that kind of debate a lot, and I think if you look at the reality, I don't think that argument holds. If you look at both legalizing and decriminalization of drugs that have happened, or countries where it's legal or not versus not, as well as sexual policy, sex ed, and contraceptive distribution and all that kind of stuff, is it seems that all of the studies, all of the kind of information shows that drug usage and teens having sex and stuff do not go up when contraceptives are available, or when drugs are decriminalized, or rather, at least when
There's a pretty good.
arrested.
I mean, didn't alcohol consumption go down once it was? I mean, it was illegal one point, like 80 years ago or something, and then they made it legal again. And I don't
Yes,
think consumption went up at all.
actually, that's also a really interesting case, which in some way contradicts what I'm saying, but is a good case for legalization in another way, which is that when Prohibition happened and alcohol was illegal, usage went down, but both death and crime related to it went up.
After it was legal?
No, when it was illegal.
Yeah, yep, absolutely.
So usage went down, but crime related and death went up.
Yeah.
So, sure, I suppose in that sense, if legalized heroin or weed or whatever, if usage went slightly up, but deaths went down because, the government was making sure that the heroin wasn't poisonous, or that it was tested to make sure it wasn't cut with anything bad, and, there wasn't organized crime and shootings because of it, because you could buy it at a pharmacy or wherever.
Didn't get AIDS from bad needles.
Right, AIDS from bad needles. Then I'm for it.
How good are the programs to get people? How good are the rehab programs for drugs too? Because you would imagine long-time users, you'd have to put them to rehab if it was legalized, right? Like mandatory rehab if you want to be a long-term user, right? And maybe that would bring usage down in the long term.
Well, there's the question of, assuming if it was legal, someone would have the right to do it if they wanted to. So if they wanted to be a lifelong heroin addict, they could be.
I think if you want to do that long term, like some mandatory type of, maybe not a huge thing like rehab, but you'd have to see some kind of guidance or counselor or something.
Maybe, but if you approach it like, like alcohol, for instance, well, I guess you can have. That's actually, I think with alcohol, I think the courts can, if you get arrested for, I don't know, let's say alcohol, like assault, or domestic violence or something like that, which is influenced by alcohol because you're an alcoholic. I think the courts can give you the choice of either going to prison or going to a mandatory rehab program. So I suppose they would do a similar thing, which is, if you could use regularly and not commit any crimes because of it, then you would be in the clear. But if it turned into violence or child neglect or anything like that, then courts could say, hey, you can go to prison if you want, but if you want to stay out of prison, you have to go to mandatory rehab.
Right, so there's this other argument against legalization. So the main libertarian argument is what you put in your body is none of your business. Like, as long as you're not affecting me, like, I don't give a fuck what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like a lot of people's actions indirectly or directly affect people. If, you know, if someone, you know, does a lot of drugs and then can't get a job, and then goes on welfare, you know, that costs people money. You know, that costs the taxpayers money. Not being a beneficial, productive member of society costs people money. Being, you know, if you're a parent and you do drugs and you don't raise your kids properly, and those, you know, that affects their kids, you know, it affects all the people around you.
So I totally agree. The thing is that is true for everything, not just drugs, but
It's true.
It's true of many things that aren't illegal, and it's just part of the society we live in that we have to accept that, you know, if you're an asshole, like, your kid's going to grow up to be an asshole 75% of the time, and that's going to affect the community we live in, and we can't do anything about that. Like,
imagine if we took it to the extreme and had mandatory workouts.
Yeah, you know, it's like, that's just part of the world, is you have to accept that.
We had drones all around and like little spy bots, like making sure you worked out that day, and if you didn't, you'd go to jail.
Yeah, I don't think, I don't know, I don't think you can regulate
Human behavior.
what?
Go ahead.
I don't think you can regulate people's actions unless they are essentially depriving someone else of their ability to live freely. You know, their actions on smaller levels will affect other people's lives in a million ways, but I think it's until, you know, you're kidnapping or assaulting or depriving a child, you know, up until that point, I don't think we can legislate how people should live.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of just splitting hairs. I mean, they are affecting people. Like, people who do drugs affect people. People who are assholes kind of affect people. People who have really unhealthy diets and then have free healthcare and have taxpayers pay for their healthcare affect other people.
I totally agree.
It's just, I guess it's less direct and it's not as much. It's like affecting everyone just a little bit rather than one person a lot, like something like kidnapping or assault does.
Right. And I actually think people overeating or I shouldn't say overeating, I should say poor diet choices or whatever, to be, I don't know, better worded, is a great example, because it comes down to a society thing. Like, do we want to live in a society where we're told how we have to eat? And I'm someone who's very into eating healthy and nutrition and exercise, and I think it would make people happier to live like, you know, the way I at least try to largely. I think it would be good for almost everybody, you know.
I'm still doing the carrots and hummus like pretty consistently. By the way,
Yeah,
it's the nuts.
But I don't want to live in a society where it's not my choice. Where, like, if I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna eat ice cream for the next 3 days. Like, I like the fact that I can if I want to. And I don't want to live in, and I think everyone would agree with that. I don't want to live in a society where that's not an option.
I'd like to live in a society where I'd be like, I feel like trying mushrooms this year, and be able to go to a reliable source and not meet some shady dude, and, you know, make sure it's like good, proper quality, you know, and be in like a good setting for it, you know.
And in a logical sense, I 100% agree with you. My only holdback is that I'm like, I don't know, I don't really want people doing mushrooms, which is stupid. And it's the same mentality as, like, well, I don't really want people to eat cake every day. Like, it'll make them worse people. And I don't mean worse in, like,
Or I don't want gays to marry.
See, that I don't give a shit at all. I'm like,
Yeah.
gay people marry all you want. Like, well, that doesn't affect my life in any way. I mean, like, I don't think it.
But people have the same mindset. Like, they think it affects them. They don't like that. And
People think it, like, fucks up kids or whatever. And I think that's bogus, but whatever. Sure, right. That same thing. And I think largely, yeah, I mean, if it came down to a vote of whether or not, a literal vote of whether mushrooms should be legal or not, I would vote for legalizing mushrooms. I'd be like, I don't like doing this, but I'm going to do it.
I have to pee. I'll be right back.
I won't stop you. Carol?
Yeah, I'm putting it on pause.
Okay, that's what I was...
Okay, I'm back. So another just kind of huge change of subject. Something I wanted to talk to you about. I think last time we talked, we didn't get to talk deeply about it. You've been meditating for like since you were 6 or 10 or something, right?
Well, it's funny. I don't really think of... I don't know. I don't really think about meditating anymore. And I haven't for a long time. When I was, I don't know, 9 or 10 or something around there, I would say. I think 6 is probably a little bit of a stretch for me to try to claim. I think it was like 9 or 10. I got really into meditation and like the whole Zen idea. I read a bunch of books by Thich Nhat Hanh. That's how you pronounce his name. I don't really know the answer to that. And kind of similar books in that realm. And became really interested in it. Got super into meditating and mindfulness and kind of understanding myself through that. And
A quick question, like
yeah.
what would be one of the first books you would recommend, like someone who's just getting into it for meditation? What's a good beginner book?
I don't know the answer to that question. I wouldn't be the person I haven't read anything about meditation in 15 years or something.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll recommend Wherever You Go, There You Are. By John Kabat-Zinn. It's a pretty decent one. You can find it for free online. I'll probably post the link for it as well, actually.
I would recommend anything by Thich Nhat Hanh.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how to spell his fucking name. I gotta figure it out later. I'll post a link for that guy as well.
It's
ThichNahtHan.
H. There's an H at the end, but
Is it like that?
no, it's like wait for it.
Gonna get it.
He also goes around still. Oh yeah, you got it.
Oh, I got it. Boom.
Trying to see. I'm confused now.
I edited it.
Oh, okay.
That's why.
I'm like, I was looking at something different.
Okay, so before I rudely interrupted you, you were saying?
Oh yeah, he also goes around the country or the world and doing lectures on meditation and mindfulness and peace, and so I also recommend going to see him if he's ever in your town. Really interesting guy. He's like 1,000,000 years old now, but definitely a cool experience I did when I was, I don't know, like 12 or something, and went and heard him speak. So back to what I was saying. I got into all that stuff, and I don't know, eventually it became more and more of just like who I am and less of like me doing something. You know, I just became a person who was very much aware of their body and how I was acting and my emotions. And so, as a person now, I'm a very, like, I don't get overtaken by kind of emotional decision making. I'm very, like, when I feel something, I think, oh, well, what is that? How is it affecting me as a person? And, I try to largely stay disconnected from, or not disconnected from, but aware of all of my like triggers, all what's making me hungry, what's making me sad, what's making me um, frustrated.
I think to backtrack a bit, and sorry for interrupting, but I think it's an important point is I think that's the biggest misconception in meditation, that it's not a practical use of your life. It's just something you set aside time to and you just focus on your breath, right? But eventually, I mean, you've been doing it way longer than me, but it becomes just something you integrate into your life. It's just about awareness, right? It's just about being present.
So typically, when people start meditating, at least in, I guess transcendental people will have like a mantra where they're meditating on a single phrase. But then there's like Zen or mindful meditation where you're concentrating on other things, and it usually starts with breathing. Is kind of like the most basic. But then it can be eating, where you do it while eating, and you just like you concentrate and meditate on the nutrients you're putting into your body and how your body is taking it, and the chewing and the swallowing and like all of the minute bits that put together such an integral part of your life, and how that is giving you strength and so on and so forth. And then it moves on to, walking or running or listening to music or, whatever else it might be. And the more you kind of learn to break down your life into how it impacts you as a human, the more it just becomes part of who you are, and the more kind of conscious of all of your interactions with the world and your daily life become. I think that's kind of the idea behind it in general.
Have you found that it's helped you at the poker table with understanding what people are doing or getting into their mindset at all?
I think it definitely helps me at the poker table, and at least in a couple ways. I'd say the most obvious way is understanding yourself and recognizing tilt and being honest about it. Recognizing when you're too tired to be playing, things like that. Recognizing your own tells, I guess, for live players, where like, a lot of people don't realize when their heart rate goes up or their leg is shaking because it's totally subconscious, or lots of things like that. And if you're more aware of like how your body reacts and how your mind reacts, then you're more aware when those things happen, and you can, give false tells, and or just control them and try to not do them, whatever approach you want to take. But then also, yeah, I think that sense, that mentality, that kind of Zen mentality, does give some insight into how other people are thinking. Not in the sense of, oh, they are thinking like I am thinking, because almost, you're not going to meet that many people at the poker table who have like a Zen outlook on the world and are applying it to their poker game. But when you realize things like, oh, this person is subconsciously acting because in a way because they're afraid to lose their chips, or because they get a thrill from bluffing. When you get into kind of the emotional reasons why someone is playing or acting the way they do, it gives you some insight into how they're going to act, or what they're doing in this instance.
I'd say even for good players, their personalities absolutely show up in their game. And
Oh, absolutely.
I coach people, and if I see they're conservative and introverted and kind of negative type of people, like that absolutely shows up in their game. Like they only think about the negative shit that could happen. They're like, I don't want to 3-bet ace king here because if I call, then I bet the flop, he's gonna call, and then I'm gonna lose. And I'm like, well, what about all the good things that happen?
I love it when people say like, "Oh, I hate ace king," or "Oh, I hate jacks."
Yeah.
like what you're telling me now is that you don't know how to play ace king, or you don't know how to play jacks. Like, they're both great hands. You should be happy to see them. Now, if you don't know how to fold them in a bad situation, or like you don't like folding when you should be, then you're a bad poker player. But when someone say, and you hear it all the time, you're like, "Oh man, I hate ace king. I never know what to do." Or like, "I feel like I get stacked more with jacks than anything else." It's like,
Yeah,
well, you're playing bad.
That's like the most extreme example, but you definitely see that live. There's more subtle examples too. Like people say, "Oh, I never 3-bet because they always call me," and then I could go into their database and look at every time they 3-bet, and everyone always fucking folds when they 3-bet because they're net,
Right.
So they only just remember the bad shit, and you could kind of just, I don't know, in my opinion, you kind of tell people are gonna play just based on their personality traits.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, I think it's pretty cool for poker. I use it while I'm actually playing tournaments as well. Um, the tournaments are like long grind online, and I think it's more important to save your energy for the end. So I think meditation's a pretty cool way to kind of save your energy and relax for like the early stages. So in between hands, I'm meditating and just trying to relax as much as possible, and then when I get into a hand, I try and like turn it on, like turn my brain on as like fast as possible. I don't know if fast is the right word, but I'm trying to like really focus when I get a hand, right? And then just turn it off again. That constant like on and off. What's like the word you use and for like working out? It's like stress and like relaxation or something.
Yeah, it's like intervals,
Yeah.
interval training.
So yeah, that's been really helpful for just really long Sunday grind type sessions as well.
That's interesting. I haven't thought of that. I'm more just like, I don't know. My mentality is always like earlier in the day. I'm just playing more tournaments. I don't really care what the outcome of any individual one is, and so I don't hold like an emotional weight to it. No, I try to not. I try to not hold an emotional weight to like a final table either. But I definitely don't hold an emotional weight to like when I'm in in a bunch of tournaments early in the day, and just kind of play good poker, but don't try to like, I don't know. I don't like over mentally stress about it, I guess. Instead of like trying to, I guess what I'm saying is instead of going from like meditation to thinking back to meditation, I just kind of like keep like a pretty
Even keel with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. A lot of the top like MTT guys, a lot of the top cash game guys are meditating nowadays. like a pretty huge percentage of them.
I think that's
Just just pretty interesting. So anyways, it's basically just a part of your life. You don't do you do any like introspection anymore, or you're like you solved yourself. You're not doing any more of that, or you're not into that anymore.
um, I I don't do anything that I call introspection. Like I don't ever like sit in my, or I don't ever say like I'm gonna introspect now. Like I just I think about my life very logically instead of emotionally, and I just think about like I don't know. I mean, I try to think about it like a poker hand with good sound poker logic, you know, and I don't. I suppose I don't have like study periods. It's just like
Okay, because I do quite a bit of like I'll do stuff just like I'll sit in silence for like an hour or two, and not really try for any result, but eventually I get some kind of result out of it. I'll do a lot of like writing and asking myself questions about a lot of the things I do or why I do them. Um, I find that really interesting and really helpful for, I guess, changing a lot of things that I think could be changed for the better or that I don't necessarily like about myself.
yeah. I think when I was younger, I did more of that type of thing, and eventually it got to a point where I'm also not a formal person. I don't like kind of taking notes. I don't like um, documenting things. I just kind of like internalizing them.
Huh.
And so, whether that's taking a class, you know, in school, or whether it's um, whatever else, whether it's you know introspecting, like it's more an internal process for me, and I don't find gains from writing it down. Like it almost feels like, well, if I can write it down, then I already know it. Is kind of my perspective on that, and that might just be the way I am as a person. It might just be kind of my
I, I think your brain just works better than I do. I can't think without writing it down. Like my brain just works so much better if I'm forcing it to slow down and write. And maybe that's just the function of intelligence or not
I'm not
meditating long
I'm
enough.
not going to try to claim intelligence here, uh, but just you know, it's a function of how my mind works versus yours, um, or maybe I don't know, just my approach from how I've changed over the years. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, what happens is if I try and do it on my own, it's just so tangential, and then I'll just start thinking of random stuff or some random song I heard on the radio that day is gonna like pop into my head. I'll just go off on 10 minutes of just that song and like not even realize. Um, I guess those things don't really happen to you though.
Um, Not that much, I would say. I mean, I also don't listen to the radio. That's a bad idea.
Radio's terrible.
No, just kidding. I mean, I'm not kidding. I don't listen to the radio, uh, but no, I don't think I get easily distracted by things that I don't want to be distracted by. Like, I feel like when I get distracted by something, it's a sign that that thing is more important to right now.
Huh.
So
That's interesting.
I had this problem when I was in school, when I was in college, was when I would have to write a paper, I would get distracted by things that I felt were more educational. Like, you know, I'd be writing about some topic and some research paper, and I'd come across a research or an academic article, like a scholarly article or something, and I'd be like, oh, this is way more interesting than what I'm writing about. I just want to learn about this now.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't get distracted by, like, I don't know,
Just the randomness.
yeah, cat videos. And don't get me wrong, I love cat videos.
Yeah, of
Who doesn't
course.
love cat videos? But no, yeah, I typically think I get, if I'm getting distracted by something, it's probably because that thing has value currently, even if it's a negative value. Like, even if it's something that is actually a distraction from what I'm trying to accomplish, it's something that is worth knowing or doing or thinking about.
So, what I find about you that's very interesting and stands out to me is like either I meet people that work a bunch and are very good at their career life and they are kind of wound up with that, or people who are like pretty good with like the social life. I find just aren't like that smart or interesting for the most part. Um, I think what's interesting about you is like you're very like intelligent. You're very like you're constantly growing and learning and doing shit that you love to do, kind of career wise. At the same time, you're really balanced in social life, which I find really interesting. And has that ever been a struggle for you, or like how do you balance the two? Because for poker players, that's really hard because there's no time where it's like, hey, you don't work now. There's no nine
Yeah,
to five. There's no weekends. There's no, you know.
yeah, and there's always a good game. There's
Yeah,
always a good game somewhere.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, I think what it comes down to is that my priorities, this is kind of the real big picture stuff. My priorities have never been my work or my social life. My priorities have always been quality of life in general. Um,
that's interesting. Please explain more.
sure. So, to me, work, like whether it's poker or whether it's a job or whatever it might be, the purpose of it isn't to become successful at that thing or make a lot of money. Those things are both good, uh, but the purpose of it is to live a good life, to be happy, to enjoy my time here, essentially. Um, the other day, a friend of mine was essentially, he was saying his company was hiring, and and although like I probably am not entirely qualified for the position they're hiring for, I'm sure I could, I could like I could pull it off. I'm pretty sure like I could pull it off, and and I thought about it, and I'm like, yeah, I've never had like a 9 to 5. I've never been like a standard cubicle grinder.
Cubicle
Maybe
grinder.
I should do that. Maybe I should like try that out and see what it's all about. And
Yeah.
then I thought about it, and I'm like, no, like, I don't like. I don't want that. I want the freedom that poker or lots of other things. Poker isn't the only thing that gives you the freedom to kind of live the life you want to live. It just turns out to be one that you can do. I don't know. In some ways, it's easier than the other ones. To become a successful novelist is really, really hard.
Yeah.
Not that many people write books and can support themselves for a lifetime just like writing novels. And sure, they exist. Lots of people do it, but it's hard and it takes a lot of luck, and marketing and a million other things. So poker is something that's kind of accessible to people who often don't have either an education or a specialized education. So that's why I use poker. But but I met so many people who would say like, oh, well, why don't you put in 80-hour a week sessions grinding hard, and you'd make a killing. You'd go up to the stakes so quickly and be killing the big games, whatever. And I was always like, yeah, it's not what I'm in it for. If I wanted to work 80 hours a week, I could probably get a job that paid more than crushing poker. Like if like I think of myself highly enough that I think if I wanted to put in 80 hours a week and have no life otherwise, I'd become like I'd work for a hedge fund or something. I'd do something that makes you a lot of money, but doesn't give you the life like the freedom. And
Yeah, I think an interesting point too is a lot of us aren't going to be as successful as we wanted to be in our minds.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you're really worried about being successful, I think for me, it's made it harder to be successful because I wouldn't want to try something because I really identify with succeeding at this thing. And if I fail, that's like a huge hit to my ego, you know?
And here's what I'll tell anybody who, people are always like, what would you tell someone who was thinking about becoming a professional poker player? And
I love the voice. God.
that's my like ridiculous interview voice and I feel like you listen to enough interviews with poker players over 15 years of your life or whatever, and you end up, I don't know, thinking it's all ridiculous. But I think poker has some great function. If what you want out of life is to become rich and successful, poker is not the avenue for it.
No.
Sure, like those things might happen, but they're incredibly few and far between. And when they are, they're not that rich and they're not that successful.
You could also be pretty successful at poker like me and be broke.
Yeah, yeah, or me to a large extent. I didn't work for a long time, and I had like a reasonable role at one point, but but the reason why I wanted to keep doing it was because I was working 20 hours a week at it. It's not because I was making a lot of money. The reason why people should go into poker, if you want to play poker for a living, it's for the freedom. It's not for the money.
I think it's also really good for learning like important virtues. But I think you can say that about anything. But
Yeah.
backtracking to money, which I think it's really fucking easy to just say to someone, don't worry about money. Money doesn't bring happiness. The problem is, like, I feel like you really need a deep understanding of a lot of different things to really feel that way. Because it just makes so many things easier. You really have to deal with, it's a lot easier to meet people when you when you have money than when you don't, and when you're successful than when you're not. So
Yeah.
I mean, you're successful at poker, you have people coming up to you. You have a lot of money, you have girls coming up to you. If you don't have those things, it's like, now I actually have to deal with being a person. People are just going to judge me on the merit of me.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I always thought that was a funny phrase too. Money doesn't bring you happiness. And of course, on some level, that's true. But uh, money brings you the ability money also brings you freedom.
Yep.
It allows you to, having nice things, like whatever, you can give or take having nice things. Having nice things is nice, but whatever. But doing nice things, I think, really has value. Traveling, going to see, live music or live, comedy or events or whatever is your niche. high-end food, things like that. There's real value in that. Those things bring happiness.
Absolutely.
And sharing those things with, with friends and girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever,
Or
and family.
another point is name a really poor person who's like helped a ton of people.
Well, I think you could come up with that if you really needed to.
Like,
I don't know. Now
I mean,
not.
I can name a lot of rich people who's really like helped society.
There's this I guess just happened because I watched it on the Daily Show last night. There's that Afghani girl. I think she's Afghani.
Malala.
What?
Malala?
Malala.
Yeah.
Malala's not rich, and she's a Nobel Peace winner who, has helped improve school conditions for kids and girls all throughout the world. So.
Well, she got famous by
Yeah.
getting shot on the head, right?
Yeah. So come on. That's not a great way to get famous. It's not like getting rich and famous. That's like she got shot by the Taliban.
I'm just saying it's very hard to be a poor, not famous person and have a big impact.
I will agree with that. It is harder. It is definitely harder to have a big impact without money.
I think what's bad though is like, or not bad, just detrimental is like tying your happiness to something with so much variance, which is, it's like the same thing as poker, I think. I mean, even if you don't play poker for money, like tying yourself to something you don't have that much control over, and that's how you judge yourself that's how you judge the quality of your life, that's how you judge yourself as a person.
Yeah, it's stupid.
It's just really stupid. It's gonna go up and down. Like, even, in Stoicism they talk about to be completely swayed by the events in your life is just stupid.
Yeah.
We just don't have a lot of control. And money is nice. The more money I get, I mean, that's very nice for me. But at the same time, it's not something that I'm that covetous of. I have like literally, I have zero. I have like a few cents in my bank account. Might have like 36 cents right now. Like quite a bit of debt, and I can still be pretty happy with. I'm still pretty happy. I'm having a good time. I have people I talk to. I have myself. I have books. And I can go outside and enjoy that.
Having a good time is the most important part to me.
You have to be able to enjoy the simple things. Because a problem with people is like, if you don't have a lot of money and you can't enjoy simple things, how are you going to be happy? If you can't enjoy going outside when it's sunny out, or watching the rain for 40 minutes, or just having a conversation with someone, or a book, or whatever it is, like listening to music on your own. Like,
yeah, you're wasting your life.
Yeah.
Like, if you can't enjoy your life, because I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. Either you're just too negative, or you're spending your entire life working, or whatever it is. If you're not spending time just like enjoying like things that you can enjoy, whether it's music or the outdoors or your friends or food or whatever it is that kind of you can enjoy. If you're not doing it, you're wasting your life.
It's difficult to enjoy those things though, especially when society makes it all about like these big events, which I mean I really enjoy too, but no one talks about like watching the rain for 40 minutes and just being really present, or eating something you cooked at home and really focusing on cooking it and putting all your attention to it, and then eating it and really focusing on the taste, or whatever it is, or being by yourself. Like, no one teaches you to enjoy just being alone on your own, silence, solitude. So I think it takes a lot of fucking skills to really feel like you don't need money.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just need to. The one skill is just a realization that, like, It's all bullshit. You know, I mean, like, the whole... Everything you're sold, you know, whether it's on TV, you know, anything that there's a commercial for, basically, like, is bullshit. And the things that when you look back at your life and you're like, you know, what did I value? You know, I don't know anyone who's going to be like, oh, is that, you know, my jewelry or like that new, I don't know, whatever else they advertise.
Those pair of sneakers I bought when I was 25.
It's always like, you know, playing board games with my friends, or like, you know, going on hikes, or, you know, whatever your thing is, you know, like time spent with family and friends, or, you know, doing things. You know, it's always the things that are interest that you're going to look back on in life are like, those are the things you end up enjoying, I think, more than, are the things that really have value more than anything that you buy in a product, essentially. You know, a new car, even, like, sure, you can enjoy your car, I guess. You can enjoy driving a fun car, but I don't know. Again, it's the driving it that's fun. It's not the having it.
I mean, yeah. I'd really like to have a nice car, but if I don't get one, that's cool. Actually, I have a really nice car that I don't drive.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. And, what?
You have a second car?
I do, and I should totally fucking sell it, but I'm just lazy as fuck and stupid.
What?
It's like a 2007 Jaguar XK, and it's really nice, and it's still worth like between 15 and 20,000 if I sell it. It's just a really big pain in the ass to do so.
And plus, you can be extra zen when you only have a couple pennies in the bank. Yeah, no, I think the quest, like, people stop asking themselves, you know, even you just said, well, I'd like to have a nice car. And I, you know, I agree with that. But the question is, the thing that people don't ask is why? Why would I enjoy that?
Yeah.
You know, we're too used to, like, these ideas that we've been given, and stop asking ourselves, like, oh, well, why do I do this? Why do I want this? Why do I act like this? And I think that brings it back to the kind of meditative sense of, like, you need to kind of realize those questions, realize what the right questions are, and think about those things. I think that's really important in figuring out, like...
It's almost just a question, like, just the little kid strategy of asking why a few times. Kind of works.
I think one of the early things that, at least I learned as a poker player, and I think most players do, is figuring out what the right questions to ask are. I feel like I remember reading this idea in, like, I don't know, some, like, bad poker book from a decade ago, like Harrington or something.
I probably read it. Go ahead.
You know. But it was the idea of, like, what the right question is. You know, like, well, do I want a call? You know, that's like, you often hear, I mean, scarily, occasionally you hear players who you think are good players saying things like, well, all I had was, you know, top, and there was a flush possible out there, so I wanted a fold. You're like, well, was it a bluff, or was it value? And, like, that's what I mean, is, like, sometimes people don't realize, like, what the real questions are. You know, the question isn't, like, people are going through, or they don't know to ask the question. They're like, oh, I've got a hand, and I'm afraid that I'm going to lose, so I'm going to bet.
Yeah,
They don't ask, like, why am I doing that?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, like, think about poker, right? How bad you were when you didn't study at it. And compare that, like, look at life as a game. And if, like, how bad do you think you'd be at life if you just never studied it? If you never...
Well, most people don't. Most people are that fish, that old fish at the table who's been playing poker for 30 years and has never sat down to think about why he plays the way he plays.
Yeah.
Most people do that in life. They're like, oh, this is just life, so I don't have to think about, like, how I'm going to raise my kids or if I'm going to go to college. Or, they just make these decisions because that's what their parents did or that's what their parents told them or that's what their communities told them. And they don't actually think about, well, why do I act this way? I mean, I would say it's 90% of religious people in this country do it because they were brought up that way, not because they've seriously thought about it in a logical sense. Do they really believe in the faith that they claim, or is it just the community they were brought up into? I think almost everyone goes through life like that, and I think it's a huge mistake. Big life leak.
Yeah, I guess it's just difficult because you just don't have anyone like saying that stuff. It's just rare, basically.
And
right.
often when people do think it, they end up being afraid to have that conversation.
Yeah, it goes back to like sounding weird, right? Like
exactly.
If I go up to a random guy and just talk about this stuff, like it's gonna sound pretty weird.
Yeah, and I think we have to fight that kind of anti-intellectual thought in the world where we think like, oh, we shouldn't, give any fringe opinions or any deep conversation because it's rude or something. It's not always pleasant. But I think the way we kind of evolve as a society is through conversations where people start thinking about why we act the way we act and why we have the opinions we have and why we have the social constructs we have.
For sure. All right, well, I can talk for like forever with you, but we're going to have to end it. I have a few questions I like to end it with, though.
Sure.
Don't mind. What are your favorite books or the book you gifted most?
Ooh.
It could be nonfiction. It could be fiction, too.
Trying to think of my bookshelf right now. I'm just like...
Such a big bookshelf.
So, it's not a big bookshelf. That's why I should... Oh, you're talking about that bookshelf. No, that's...
You haven't read any of those books on that shelf?
I have. I've read a bunch, but I have not read all of them.
Oh, okay.
That is my father's bookshelf often. The books that he didn't take with him, actually.
I see.
I'm gonna... Here, give me 1 second. I'm now running with my computer. And I'm going to see if something is an obvious answer when I get up here. I really like Chomsky. I don't know, he's written a million books. I really liked Hegemony or Survival, which is politics. I really like Kurt Vonnegut sitting here. I really like Breakfast of Champions.
What's that book, Breakfast of Champions?
It's a fiction book about a guy living in a kind of post-apocalyptic world. It's very Vonnegut-y. It's like a perverse, satirical look on culture and society. If you haven't read any Vonnegut, that or Cat's Cradle or what's that other Vonnegut that is the Welcome to the Monkey House, Slaughterhouse 5. Those are all... Slaughterhouse 5 might be like the quintessential Vonnegut. I definitely highly support Vonnegut. Uh,
Yeah, I'm
so
almost done.
I'll go with that.
Okay, cool. Anything that if you go back like 5 or 10 years and tell yourself like one thing, you only get like 5 seconds. You get like one sentence. What would you tell yourself?
Don't go to college.
Don't go to college.
I hate college.
Okay,
And that's telling myself. Some people college is great for. Me personally, college isn't for me.
cool. Alright, dude. Thanks for being on. Enjoyed the fuck out of it.
Anytime.
Alright, peace.
Peace.